This movie is set in the future, where temperatures on Earth have reached new, unbearable levels. Most wildlife species have gone extinct, and hundreds of millions of people have become climate refugees, while the world's oil, coal, and gas reserves have depleted since a new planet known as the Red Moon appeared in the sky. Mankind had gone to great lengths to get to it and mine its mineral known as Lumina. However, the hyper-energetic element rendered all other sources of energy on Earth obsolete. With the planet now on a collision course with Earth, only one man can save the world. Hello, welcome back to IM Movies. Today we're covering the 2020 French science fiction film known as The Last Journey of Paul W.R. But before we jump into the details, make sure to show us some love by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Now, let's get right into it. The movie starts with Paul W.R., the astronaut who is expected to save the world from the Red Moon. But he's nowhere to be found as he now wanders through wastelands looking for a forest he saw in his childhood vision. However, Paul is also the second son of Henry W.R., the owner of Space W.R., the company that mines Lumina energy from the Red Moon. Now, while wandering through desert lands and running away from cops, Paul bumps into a man at the border of the city. Paul asks this man where he can get a cab ride, and the man offers to sell one of his. This man also notices that Paul is hiding from the cops, so he quickly takes him to the location of the car. While checking out the car, a cop surveillance robot spots Paul and immediately alerts the cops. But before they got there, Paul was gone. At this time, the Red Moon is estimated to destroy the Earth in 7 days as it keeps getting closer. However, the only person capable of stopping it is on the run. Now Paul has the sketch of a forest from his childhood. This piece of drawing is part of a bigger book that holds the answer to future events concerning the Red Moon. But at this point, Paul finds it hard to remember its location as he seems to be gradually losing his memory. However, he keeps hearing a voice in his head telling him to run to the forest for answers. Unfortunately, Paul's car breaks down due to faulty batteries, and while he is checking it out, he spots a cop surveillance robot watching him. Paul tries to shoot at it, but he keeps missing it. So he injects himself with a medication, and soon regains his precision and shoots it down. Now this medication was given to him by his father, Henry W.R. So Paul decides to push the car to a store and soon spots a patrol van in the area. He rushes into the store where he meets a young girl named Elma. Paul tries to buy a battery from Elma, but she says it will take 3 days to get it delivered. Paul explains to her that he can't wait for 3 days and offers to pay double the price if he can get it faster. Now, on the news, Paul sees his elder brother Elliot W.R. flying to the Red Moon in his place. But as soon as Elliot approaches the magnetic field, he loses control of the spacecraft and begins to beg that they abort the mission. Paul watches his brother scream in pain, and after a while, the broadcast goes off. Paul is saddened by the death of his brother as he recalls their childhood days. Paul recalls how he had asked his dad if the Lumina could save his sick mother's life, and also recalls how he was struck by lightning. Paul wakes up from this and decides to take his medication, but a voice keeps telling him to stop taking it. And Elliot's spacecraft later came crashing down to Earth. Now, Elma is a troubled child with a bitter father and late mother, but she'd always look for ways to make herself happy, and sometimes choose to do so by dancing. After dancing for a while, Elma hangs pictures of her family, which includes her mum, her dad, and herself as a kid. However, she later realizes that Paul is the astronaut that everyone has been looking for on TV. Seeing this, Elma picks up her gun and decides to find Paul. On her way out, her father warns her to be careful, stating that there are dangerous people out there, but she ignores him. A few minutes later, 2 kids spot an object crashing down to Earth. They open it and find Elliot inside alive. Meanwhile, Elma confronts Paul about his identity, asking him if he's the astronaut who is supposed to save the world, but he denies it. Now, since Elma knows he's lying, she plays along and begs him to take her with him wherever he's going. Now, while treating Elliot, the doctors realized that he had been brought back to life by another force because his heart had stopped for hours before he crashed back to Earth. Now, after receiving treatment, Elliot tells his father about his favorite childhood memory with Paul and promises to bring him back. As soon as Henry leaves, Elliot smirks at him and his eyes turn dark as if being possessed. The next day, cops approach Paul's location looking for him while Elma watches as Paul carefully avoids detection. However, the cops soon get distracted by a man wandering through the area, and they shoot him dead, and Paul manages to escape. Meanwhile, Elma's father soon discovers the pictures she had earlier and gets angry. Now, before Elma could get back, her father had set the truck ablaze, And as soon as Elma sees this, she breaks down in tears. The next day, Paul is shocked to see his dead brother Elliot walking into the store. Elliot meets with Elma's father and asks about Paul. However, Paul uses this opportunity to steal Elliot's Lumina battery. Meanwhile, Elliot begins to use his mind-reading ability to manipulate Elma's father into killing himself. Elma sees this and screams as she begins to run away, but Elliot sends a spy robot after her. However, she soon gets tired, and Paul picks her up. Luck soon shines on Elliot as Paul's Lumina battery gets delivered to the store. Now, after driving for a while, Paul decides to dump Elma, but she refuses to leave, threatening to expose him if he dumps her. Elma also tries to prove that she could be useful to him, but Paul isn't buying it. However, he later agrees to allow her to stay in the back of his car only till the next day. Then, Paul begins to recall how he used to see visions as a child. However, his father only sees these visions as mere illusions and warns him against them. In his recollection, he remembers telling Elliot that he saw him too, but as a different person because he was dead, but Elliot had told him it was just a dream. Elma wakes up the next day in Paul's car and realizes that Paul has decided not to get rid of her anymore. However, his car soon begins to warn him about a checkpoint ahead, so he decides to let Elma drive to the checkpoint. However, they only meet one cop at the checkpoint, which makes it easier for Paul to hide, as Elma distracts the cop with an umbrella. Later, they both arrive at a restaurant, and Paul asks for a phone. Paul calls his father to ask if Elliot really made it back alive, and Henry tells him yes. However, the voice in Paul's head tells him it's not true. Then, Paul tells Henry that he can't destroy the Red Moon, but Henry disagrees, saying it's okay for Paul to be scared, but he needs to trust him. Henry goes ahead to state that he made a mistake listening to doctors when his wife was sick, but realizes his mistake when it was too late. But as soon as Henry drops the call, Paul realizes that a cop is now standing behind him. Paul gets into a fight with the cop, and the cop beat him up so badly that Elma managed to distract the cop. Paul uses this opportunity to hit the cop unconscious, and they both run away from the scene. On their way, Elma demands to know what is really going on as payment for saving him. So, Paul begins to narrate how he used to see strange visions as a child just after the lightning incident. He had always known that mining Lumina from the Red Moon was a big mistake. As a child, Paul had studied the history of the Red Moon and discovered that it had always crossed Earth's path and was best left alone. Meanwhile, Henry W.R. was about to start mining Lumina from the Red Moon at the time, so Paul showed him his discovery to warn him. However, Henry concluded that Paul was sick and placed him on medications. After the narration, Paul decides to dump his medication, and Elma later helps dye his hair to change his look. Meanwhile, Elliot is still following their trail, and soon arrives at the restaurant. Elliot meets with the lady in charge, and she soon begins to tell him everything she knows. Unfortunately for her, Elliot later begins to manipulate her mind, making her electrocute herself to death with a fork. Meanwhile, Paul shows Elma the sketch of the forest he saw in his visions, stating that it's the only vision he still sees since the rest were wiped away by the medication. The next morning, Elliot's spy robot crawls into Paul's car as a tracker. However, Paul soon realizes he's been followed and speeds up. But Elma immediately draws his attention to a deadly sandstorm ahead. Regardless, Paul speeds into the storm, but Elliot is still able to trail him. Now, as soon as Paul spots the spy robot, he takes it down, and this makes Elliot angry as he loses track of them. While in the sandstorm, Paul and Elma step inside an abandoned cinema. Inside, Elma gets to see animals that have gone extinct since the apocalypse began. Later, the cinema screen displays the same forest that Paul saw in his visions, leaving him in shock. But since the forest no longer exists, he quickly accepts that his father was right about him all along. However, Elma tries to convince him otherwise, but he asks her to leave him alone. Later, cops arrive outside the cinema and Elma begins to panic, but Paul says he has an idea she wouldn't like. His idea is to step out of the cinema holding Elma hostage. And as soon as they step out, Paul sees Elliot and stares at him in shock. Elliot points at Elma with a gunshot sign, and Elma gets shot. Immediately, Paul begins to exchange gunshots with the cops as he manages to escape. However, Elliot soon begins to chase them. Now, after a while, Paul begins to panic as he faces another checkpoint, but Elma grabs the car's control box and pushes a button that makes the car lift off higher into the sky as Elliot continues to give them a hot chase. Later, Elliot flies past Paul's car and comes face to face with him, causing them to crash into each other and then to the ground. After a while, Paul gets up and points his gun at Elliot. However, Elliot tries to manipulate Paul's mind just like the others, telling him to kill himself. But Elma keeps whispering to Paul not to do it. Fortunately, Paul was able to overcome it, and he suddenly shoots Elliot in the head. Later, Paul remembers the spot where he hid his sketchbook and finally surrenders to the cops after realizing his fate from the book. Meanwhile, doctors struggle to bring Elma back to life as they begin to prepare Paul for his mission. Finally, Paul W.R. takes to the sky and easily breaks through the magnetic field. Now, as soon as Paul breaks through the magnetic field, we see Elma alive and walks out. She realizes that he'd left his book in her jacket, and as soon as she opens it, she realizes that she'd been in visions that Paul talked about all along. Now, Paul's mission is to destroy the Red Moon, but he cuts off all communications for a while and later speaks to his father for a few seconds, telling him to trust him this time. Then, Paul proceeds to initiate self-destruct mode for the spacecraft as he floats out of the Red Moon, and it soon begins to count down from 10. Meanwhile, as Elma opens the book, she gets to the second to the last page and soon discovers that the book predicts Paul's death and the spacecraft explodes. Elma stares in shock as she finally looks to the sky holding an umbrella, fulfilling the last prediction on the last page of the book. This movie highlights the dire consequences of unchecked environmental degradation, resource exploitation, and the pursuit of new energy sources without regard for the planet's well-being. It serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of responsible resource management, sustainability, and the need for collective action to address climate change and environmental crises before they become irreversible. And the movie ends here. If you'd like to see us recap any other movies or topics you have in mind, just drop a comment and let us know. And don't forget to hit the like button, share this recap, and subscribe to stay updated for the next one. Until next time.